Okay, let's get going. Um, as Jeff mentioned, I'm editor of Flute Talk magazine, and it surprised me once I became editor what the most requested item was from all of the previous issues of Flute Talk, and it was the 1988 article by Frances Lapp Everett, where she reports on Michel DeBoe's scale game, and she publishes his 60 ways of playing scales. Many of you may have downloaded that or copied it out of the magazine at the time. And I was one of those ones who did it too. I looked at his scale game and I thought, this is genius. However, it's way too hard for my students. And by way too hard, I meant it would have the kind of things in it maybe students wouldn't have the patience to do, like playing scales at 40 to the eighth note on the metronome. You know, I can tell you my students, like probably like yours, are very action oriented. They like to play rhythms, they like to play fast, they like to tongue, they like to do things. So I just kind of took his idea and wrote my own scale game. Um, Within the next few years, he began coming out to Idaho with me and teaching my Pocatello Flute Week. And so the first time he came, I said, well, at 10 o'clock, you're going to lead a scale game. And, you know, I wrote one because yours is wonderful for the professional player, but for the student, it's a little too hard. Oh, he was thrilled. He said, oh, I can't believe somebody's doing something with this. And so then I said, oh, and also too, here in Idaho, we all play together. We don't just have one person play and then the next person play on a different key and go around the room that way. We all play together. And he said, you can do that? I said, oh, yeah, it works great. After he came out from teaching the class, he said, I'll never do it the old way again. Everybody will always play. Well, time went on. Michelle kept coming back in the summers to teach. And I noticed that some of my students moved a certain way when they played certain rhythms or certain patterns, and some of the other ones didn't. And the ones who seemed to move in the same way that I did or the Michelle did were the more musical ones. And so I set about trying to figure out what what was on the page that made them move a certain way. And uh, it took me a while to figure this out, but I think I have, and I want to share that with you first before we start, and then the scale game will make a lot more sense. In music, we have two gestures. Either we come away from the beat or we lead to the beat. And I know on the East Coast there's probably more students that are descendants of William Kincaid than there are in the rest of the country or where I live. Um, but I was fortunate enough to study with him, and you may recall he taught a note grouping pattern where you played your scales 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and then faster where it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That forward flow idea. I was never really comfortable with that when I was studying with him. And one day I just said, I'm playing this Mozart concerto, and I just don't feel like that some of these runs should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. I feel like they should just kind of go. And he said, you think about it. I did think about it. And luckily for me, or unluckily for me, I toyed with the idea of doing a music education major at Eastman rather than a performance major. And I had to take a year of violin. And that year of violin was probably one of the courses that I use the most because I learned so much about bowing. And the Kincaid 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 is really an up bow idea, because in violin playing, kind of the very basic bowing, if the idea starts on the beat, the idea is as a down and up idea, which would be down bow, up bow. If the idea starts off the beat, it's an up bow idea. And I realized, Kincaid had half the story just great, but there's a whole nother story out there. And now we know through the study of early music that idea of coming away from the beat, of the down up idea, was very prominent because the early music is about dancing, where the romantic music is all about singing and going to one, leading to one. So the two gestures that we use, the first is down up. And this one Kincaid taught, but only for doing two note slurs. down, up, down, up, down. And I'm not moving, when I do this, I'm not moving anything on my chin. It's the same gesture that I would use when I'm cueing somebody to play and I go, I just take a breath and lift. That's all it is. It's not, the flute's not wiggling like this on your chin. The other gesture, forward flow, is actually the flute is stationary, but if you're standing, you're shifting your weight from the right back foot to the front left foot. So it's this feeling going forward. If I'm sitting in a chair now, so I'm rocking from my right back sits bone to my left sits bone. And if you're sitting in a chair, your body should be 45 degrees to the right when you're playing with the screen. Okay, well, we're going to work on these two gestures, and the way they're notated in the flute scale book is the down bow you actually uses the down bow idea from violin bowing, and then we use the up bow. But with the up bow for us as flute players, we can go up bow forward or up bow back. And if you'll notice, about a third of the way down this page, it says there's a down bow sign, move the flute down, up bow forward, move the flute forward, shift the weight forward, up bow back, shift the weight back. And I like to play these scales with bowings because I think it helps put the phrasing gesture in my head more, just where it's better. Now, in the practice room or in the studio, I encourage the students to move a lot. And it's kind of the old Karate Kid idea. You remember where he washed the car on and he polished it off and everything? He did it thousands of times until it became a natural movement for him. And that's what we want. We want to have that feeling of that we're really directing a line. So we're going to overdo it in the studio. But when I'm on stage, if I'm doing a forward flow, it may be as small as that. You probably wouldn't even notice that it's being done, you know. The down and up, we may use more, especially if we're cueing and we want to cue a retard, or we want to speed up or something, or we want to do some kind of cutoff, you know. Okay, now the scale again that I'm using is based on the tone color scales from our flute scale book. Um, and I changed the name. I guess in the Toffanel number 4, there was no name at all, but I just named this exercise tone color scales because I think people do this exercise, but they don't realize what the end goal is. And the end goal is to get a homogeneous sound throughout the range. And, by going F to F, and then it's just one note up, and G to G. Can you make that sound the same as F to F? And you work your way up and you work your way down. So just with these one octave scales, you're really working on having the same tone color throughout the range. And by tone color we mean timbre. Um, I went to Home Depot and I looked at the paint chips on the wall and I picked out a whole bunch of them in a blue and a whole bunch in a green and a whole bunch in a kind of a red and a purple. And so I have these. And so we look at them, in the studio and say, look, this is still blue, but they're going to be blue with less core and blue with more core. And that's the kind of thing here. We're trying to get control over the tone color so that we don't sound like that we're playing blue, 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 orange, blue, 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 red, so that so the color changes. Okay, so our goals in doing this, so number 1 is the phrasing gestures. The number 2 is to take those phrasing gestures and have intelligent movement. Too many flutists never think about what happens on the end of their flute, and they have a tremendous amount of tension on the end of the flute because it's going all the time in just a really weird direction. We're trying to get this where it's much more relaxed and flowing with the end of the flute, and that's why we call this intelligent movement. We're also looking for a homogeneous sound throughout, and we're also working to keep the fingers very close to the keys. And something you may not have thought about, but I really like to think about the key, the tip of my finger, the little pad here, hitting in the same place on the key every time I play, so that I'm always touching in the same place, because I think that's where you get really the beautiful control of the legato. the last thing that I think there's many things you can think about. The other thing I just want to mention is Kincaid talked a lot about this being a fingerboard, and I think we don't think about this enough. But if you're trying to build your technique, this is something that you really, this is the key in. So when you start on low D, you're here, and you go all the way up, say to C sharp, which is there. The next note after C sharp is D, which is all the way back down here. Every time you're playing and you have to go all the way back to the end of the flute, that's where you have to be cautious. That's where you have to wait just a nanosecond so that all your fingers are down and everything. And you kind of play out of time to be in time. So let's just take that F major scale. So we're starting here, F, G, A. Now, when I go to the B flat, I'm really going back toward the foot joint of the instrument again. C, I'm good. Now, from C to D, do you see I have to go all the way back to the foot joint? So that C to D takes a little bit more time than going from D to E or E to F. And so I don't know if you've ever played a show, a Broadway show, but when you get the books, you'll see that before certain passages, there'll just be a slash before a note. And that's what somebody has written in there to show you that just this. And it's interesting, just when your eye sees that slash, that just it's enough enough time to slow you down so you finger correctly. And you may not have ever thought, well, how did they decide where to put that slash? But it has to do with where you are on the flute. So thinking this is a fingerboard, just like a violinist would, where all the notes are, is very, very good. Okay. Um, so we're going to start with F major. And I just like to mention one thing. I was talking with Trevor Y about TNG number 4, and it always bothered me that in the minor scales, they weren't consistent throughout the whole exercise. I think there's 4 or 5 places that you have to go in and fix the accidentals for students. And I was talking about him, and he said, well, you realize that exercise came from somebody else from an earlier time. That was not original with Toffanel or Gobert. And I said, no, I didn't realize that. And he said, yeah, it's an early treatise. And I said, well, which one? And he said, I don't know. I can't remember. He said, if it shows up here, I'll let you know. Well, in writing one of our books, I was going through IMSLP with a fine tooth comb, and I found it. And it's in the POPP, Flute School, Volume 2. And in that, the minor scales are always written in the melodic minor form. And so in talking with Trevor, he said that he had decided that he was going to have his students play the minor section all in pure form, then in harmonic form and melodic form. I don't have the luxury of having that much time with my students. And so I made the decision of kind of what many of the violin professors have done at universities. Melodic minor scales is the way we're going. And so in our scale book, they're written out in the melodic minor form. And so that's something you might want to consider when you're doing your scale game, about maybe not playing the minor scales in such a mixture. So anyway, okay. We're going to start first. So get your flute and be sure it's aligned well. However you align it, it's a personal decision. It's just the main thing, you should align the same way every day. Okay. So we're going to start with the phrasing gestures, and we're going to work in chunks. And a chunk is a group of notes, usually an inch long, and then you take a rest. And during the rest, you take a sit breath. A sit breath is just some people call them guppy breaths, but whatever it is, it's just a topping it off kind of breath. And we're going to slur by 4s, and we're going to go from down to up. Okay? Now we're going to start right there because we have a lot to do and we don't have a lot of time. Now we're going to go to number 2, which is down and up by eights. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then you bring it back down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we call that retaking your bow. That's what you're going to, so you're going back to the spot. One of the problems that we have on the flute is when the notes go up, we like to lift the end of the flute. When the notes go down, we like to go this way with the flute. To play the flute well, the flute should be balanced in the hand and stable. It should not move at all. The only thing that moves are your fingers. And so if you notice that when you're playing and your flute's sagging, that's tension that you don't want. Okay, now we're going to do down and up by eights, starting again on the first line. Retake your bow. Okay, number 3, we're going to do it by 16ths. That's a whole measure. So start back on measure 1 again. Now you can keep building on that idea of doing 2 measures, 4 measures, and ultimately what you want to be able to do is all 8 measures as the flute is coming up, which leads to me to one of my favorite sayings of all times. If you really want to improve your technique, and we're talking about fast technique in this situation, if you can play more notes on one gesture, you'll be able to go faster. But if the flute is moving for every note or every 2 notes or every 4 notes or whatever, this is slowing you down. But if you're doing 8 measures and the flute's just moving like this, it's amazing how fast you can play and how good it sounds. Okay, now we're going to work forward flow. So I sometimes think about these two as like the compass on a map. You know, you have down and up, and then you want to have going across, so north and south and east and west. Down and up is like north and south. You want the flute to be going straight up and down. Now with east and west, the flute goes straight. So you don't want any curlies cues on the way. It's just a straight movement, and you're not moving the flute. You're just moving your body. You're going from your sits bone to your sits bone. So you're actually rocking. So we're going to go by fours just to practice this gesture. So 4 notes forward, 4 notes back. Good. Now let's try 8 notes forward, 8 notes back. Now, if we could go to the next page. And now we're going to go forward flow by 16ths. That's a whole measure. Good. And that could go on and do 2 measures, 4 measures, 8 measures, whatever length it has. You know, one of Joseph Mariano's favorite sayings was play on the air. And this is so wonderful because this direction that you're moving helps you always think about blowing out and playing on the air. And then his variation of that, finger on the air, finger on the air. So you see the airstream coming out and you're fingering on it, which is kind of a weird sensation because the air is going this way, but your fingers are totally going this way. It's like it's kind of a cross idea. Okay. Now the next ideas are got kind of about what to do to work on fast technique, and our first one is probably one of the most famous rhythms that high school bands do. Bum ba da 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 dum, bim ba da 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 dum. But we're going to slur it. Now the first note is a solitaire. We're going to do down, and then we're going to go forward, and then we're going to just come back. And you won't need to do the down so much on on the it'll work out. Just trust me. Okay, here we go. Good. Now, the next one is the same idea, but we change that rhythm into triplets. Anytime you can go from duples to triplets or from fours to threes, it puts the stress on the on certain notes in a different place in the scale, and that's when it really starts evening your fingers out, where you feel like your fingers kind of have equal tension with them all. So we're not going to do number 8. We're going to move to number 9. And these numbers that are written in front of these are straight out of the scale book. And so there's, I don't know, 450 ways to play rhythms and articulations and everything. And these are just numbered the back of the scale book. So let's look at number 63. This is one of my favorite ones. And if there's a day, it's number 9, number 63. If I don't have a lot of time, I will do this one because it really loosens up my fingers and I feel very relaxed when I finish playing. So it's down and then forward flow for the next 8 notes, and then back and then forward. So. Great exercise. All right, now let's look at number 10 through 12. These three are based on DeBo's idea, and he has a longer version of this, but I just kind of cut to the chase on this. Um, that often when you're playing a concerto, you're going along at a certain tempo and you're playing notes by twos or by fours or something, and then all of a sudden you've got a whoom, big run that you have to play. And he said it always takes you by shock. And so he said, let's just practice that. So we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 7, 8. Okay, here we go. Okay, now let's go to the next one. 4, 8, 4. Back at the top. Good. Now let's do where to start with the 8 right at the beginning. And playing that at various speeds will really help you develop your technique. And I always try to make it when I'm giving a class to my student. The one where you have to do 8 notes going over the top, I always make sure that we're on one of the high scales like B, B flat, or A, because I want them to get where they can go over the top as easily as in the high octave as they can in the lower notes. Okay, the next ideas we're going to use are based on working articulation in some way. And this the very first one is a notation problem because we see something written, but we don't play it that way. And what I'm talking about is the first eighth note in number 42, which is an eighth note. We never play da 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 da. We always play ba 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 ba. Ba, 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 because short notes lead into longer notes. They always phrase forward. And so that first eighth note becomes actually a 16th, and then we have a 16th rest, and that's called an articulatory silence. So dum ba 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 ba. The eighth notes always is about half value. Okay. If you want to double tongue this, great. If you want a single tongue, great. If you want to do it all with key, 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 great. If you want to do it with ha 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 ha, go for it. Lots of possibilities. Now, this line, let's go to number 43, the opposite of what we did. We'll go the long, short, short. Now it's going to be short, short, long, short, short, long. Line 2. Good. Now you could do it with triplets afterwards. So we're going to line 3, dum, triplet, dum, da, 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 da. This will help with bolero. And then you can do the opposite of that, where you put the triplet first. And then if you look at the last one, it's 1, 4, 1, 4, 1. This is the last line starting on the A. Good. Now, something that you may not have thought about, but when I was working on the chunking book, and I realized what chunking was, playing by inches, because that's what the eye sees. The eye sees a circular inch and takes in all that information in a quarter of a second, and then it hops to the next chunk. So when you're reading, you're doing chunk, 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 chunk. It's called, those are called, those little chunks, it's called a fixation. What I couldn't figure out when I started doing this with my students is how good they all sounded. It was much later that I found out that muscles actually work on the off on kind of idea. So the whole idea of just tonguing something and tonguing forever, like a whole page of Anderson or something. And then my teacher used to say, when you get to the bottom of the page, go back and do it. When you think you're going to die, go back at the top and go to do it again. And that's where progress is made. Maybe not, that actually playing fast tonguing and very small snippets, you're actually going to learn that gesture better in your brain, and the results will be just much better. So you can give it a try and see what you think. But for me, I always do tonguing things in a chunk. So like the Midsummer Night's Dream, I would chunk by measure, but that you play that measure as fast as you can and as clean as you can, and then after you get where you can play all the measures, wonderful. Then go back and play 2 measures chunked, and then go back 3 measures, and then eventually you'll build it up. But you've practiced the right stroke for success. Okay, next, we're going to talk a little bit about vibrato. If you've never seen my x-ray video, if you Google Patricia George x-ray, it will come up. And I got in a fluoroscope machine, I think in about 2008, and it was part of a friend's doctoral thesis where he was scoping everybody, all the woodwind instruments, and writing about the different placement, like of the tongue and just everything. And so I was his guinea pig for flute, and he couldn't figure out how to do it, because everybody else got in the fluoroscope machine straight on like this, but with the flute, because our spine is so strong, you really couldn't get any definition in here. But he saw me doing, I like to do a lot of left-hand flute things, playing scales that way with just one hand, and then stabilizing the flute with my right hand on the barrel. When he saw me do that, he said, "Oh my gosh, I think you'll fit in the fluoroscope machine that way with the flute." So I was in this fluoroscope machine, which had about that much space, and the end of the flute, everything from the G was hanging out. And probably the most interesting thing was when I was doing vibrato exercises, and for me it kind of proved that vibrato happens in the vocal folds, or in what we call the throat, or the vocal folds, or the larynx, and what happens is they're vibrating like this, and when they're farther apart, more air comes through, and that gives you the sharp side of the vibrato cycle, and when they're closer together, that is the bottom part of this. So when you're playing and vibrating, your vocal folds are actually going like this. One of my students' mother was a speech therapist, and told me, she said, if you put it, because I'd always been teaching ah, 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 ah. And she said, if you'll put an H on that, it'll actually open that space a little bit more. So we start out with vibrato on them. Ha, 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 ha. And all vibrato is slurring the ha's. So you do. There's no movement in the chest, in the abdomen, in your big toe, any place. It all happens right here. And if you can become efficient at doing it right here, you're going to find your product is a lot better. Now, I know, when I was growing up, you said, "Oh, we don't want a throat vibrato or a nanny goat vibrato and everything." That has to do with placement. If you place the throat vibrato very forward, you get the nanny goat. If it's ha 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 placed too far back, it's made much too slow. So it's kind of like on a sliding scale between he and ha, where you're going to be. And my kids think that's funny because they like Comedy Central and hee haw, that I would use that in a lesson. But, if your vibrato sounds too fast, then you're too much in the he position in the vocal folds, and just see if you can move it back to more of the ha if you're too slow. And as I get older, my vibrato is getting slower and slower and slower. So I have to think about pushing my vibrato more to the he place. But maybe you're one that needs to go to the ha. So it's one of those things what you're doing. So what we want to do here, I'd like to just do some vibrato cycles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1. And I want you to notice that I'm making diminuendo. I'm coming away from one. That's something I really want my students to practice a lot, because William Bennett was teaching my students one day, and he went over to the piano and he played a note on the piano, and he said, "Listen to that note." It goes boing, and it decays. And he said, we flute players need to decay more. And he's exactly right, because it's a lot more interesting to listen to if the notes have that more of that triangular shape. So let's try ba ya 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 ya, ba ya 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 ya, da ya ya. And listen carefully that the first note you play is not sharp. I don't know, with Zoom sound, I'm not sure you can hear it, but I was able to, on most of those, when I was tapering down, by the time I got to the end of the last one, I was able to get a whistle, and which I really like. I like doing that. Now, one of my favorite vibrato exercises I learned from Frances Blaisdell when I was a teenager, and it's this next one down, and you put 5 vibratos on all the ones of the first of the 4 beam notes, and then on the next notes you don't put any vibrato. So it's one of those things of practicing the opposite to make something better. So we're going to do da ya 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 ya, ba da 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 ya 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 ya. And this is to show you that when you land on a long note, the vibrato has got to start right away. You can't land and then start the vibrato. We hear that too much in flute playing, and it's not good. So we'll try a measure of that. And of course, some of you who knew Frances, she always sang with this, I am going home to take a bath, to feed the bird, to wash the car. She had so many things that she was going to do when she got home, but she would sing this with you with your scales. And I really think it helped us make our scales much more lyric, where they sounded like music. That one's really fun to do. And if I'm in a class, I may divide the room up in half, and one person plays the psalter at the beginning, one half, then the other half of the room plays 2, 3, 4, 1, then the other one, and they sing song back and forth like you're playing ping pong. Um, Another favorite thing to do is to take the vibrato off and on. Just practice doing that. So like da ya 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 like that, and then opposite da ya ya da ya ya. And you could do that alternating anything. And once you're good at going from nothing to something, like 0 to 2, 0 to 3, 0 to 4, 0 to 5, 0 to 6, then you can start experimenting. One of my favorite things to do is 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, actually controlling how many vibrato I put on each note of a scale. It's wonderful for vibrato control. Let's just try that right now. Let's try first. We'll do the first measure 0, 2, 0, 2. So the first note's none, the next one's 2, and back and forth. And this is all a forward flow idea of the flute going forward. Now let's do 2, 1. We're in the second measure. And then you could do it with the 3s, 4s, whatever. Now let's try 2 on the first note, 3 on the second note. Alternate 2s and 3s. This is the third measure. I like to do a lot of practicing like that, where I really have control of what I'm doing the vibrato. I keep reminding, is your vibrato controlling you? Are you controlling your vibrato? And the answer for too many of us is the vibrato is controlling us. Now, when you play, I spin. I think about having that vibrato spinning. There's the old story about the spinning orange, that you have an orange in your mouth. And the idea of the orange is that means your teeth are really separated and everything's nice and open. Your lips are there. And in there, you have an orange, and your air has got your vibrato has got to spin that orange. The orange may be a little big for you. Maybe a little round red jack ball might be more the appropriate size. But that idea that it's always alive and the air is moving along. Another thing with the scales, and this will be the last thing that we do, has to do with putting ornaments on it. And I'm sure there's many of you who are teachers, and you know how hard it is to get a student to play an ornament on the beat. They all play before the beat. They probably play a lot of things before the beat, but I just thought this would be a cool thing to do. And so I thought we could do it. We're going to put a mordant, we're going to slur by 2. So we have a down, up, working the psi figure, the Mannheim psi figure, but we'll put a ornament on a mordant on the first note. Ba-da-da, ba-da, ba-da, ba. Okay. This will be a down up idea. Now, I just want to stop here. And when the flute is at the down position, that's the ictus. Like when a conductor conducts and you see that little jerk, that's where you should be playing, is on the ictus. And I think this movement from down to helps you not play while you're still going down. You can't play the mordent until you're at the ictus. Let's do the second measure. Wait, 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 wait. So you can say wait with them to help them figure out what that is. You know, what the old saying is that students play ahead of the beat. Old people like me like to play late on the beat. But to get a job, you've got to play on the beat. There's our problem right there. Okay. Um, Now, the other thing I like to do is, as this last one that was written on the page, is adding the mordant in there. And I like to do a slow mordant, because if you, once you start thinking about it or watching for it, you'd be surprised how many etudes begin with a mordant, or with a gruppetto, or like the Schubert variation number 5 is a gruppetto. And we don't read it that way because we read by 4s rather than by 8s. Reading by 8s is if you can get where you read 16ths by 8ths, a real boon for you. So we're going to do da dee da da, strong weak, strong weak, strong weak, strong weak. Okay, and we'll do this in the key of F. No, then you can get fancier with it. Da dee da 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 da, mordant da da da. Let's try that. So we put a mordant on 2 and 4 and a gruppetto on 1 and 3. One of my favorite pages in the flute scale book is putting a gruppetto on each note of a scale. And I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but the beauty of practicing gruppettos is it's one finger up, back again, one finger down. So you're changing the direction very quickly, and the flute is not going like that. The idea of keeping that flute stationary. So practicing gruppettos is wonderful for working on stabilizing the flute. So by my clock, my big trusty clock, we're at, I guess, 10:45 my time and 11:45 your time. Do we have any questions that I'm happy to answer? You can just unmute yourself and go for. I don't know if it's legal or not. If it is, cut me off, Jeff. But I have a new book coming out that people say, what did you do during the pandemic? I wrote a new book, and actually the book I started in 2013, and then just life intervened and I couldn't get it done. But with the pandemic, I was able to get it finished. It's called The Top Octave for Flute or Piccolo, and it's 84 pages of way up high with ledger lines, with cool instructions and things to do, a lot of great exercises and warm-ups. I just know my students need this, because if you've never really thought about it this way, but the top octave notes are the last ones that you learned, so all the other notes in the first 2 octaves, you've played so many more times than you have those very top ones. And so we've got to change that around where we play the top ones as much as we played the bottom. And I have to say, I've been proofing the book and, going slow, because I don't want any wrong notes or anything, and I'm getting better. And that's very exciting when you can hear improvement in your own playing, you know. So Danny Dorff tells me it'll be out early summer. So I'd love it if you'd give it a look. Any questions?
Several
What's
people
the
did
name of your
ask
book?
about, oh, sorry, Deirdre.
Oh,
had a
sorry,
question.
Jeff. What is the name of the book so that we can keep our eye out for it?
The Top Octave for Flute or Piccolo.
Cool.
84
Thank you.
pages.
And several people did ask for the handout. Again, it was posted at the top of the chat, but Kathy, thank you very much, posted the link to Pat's presenter page on the New York Flute Club website where you can download the handout there as well.
Or you can write me georgeflute@hotmail.com. If you have any questions, I'm on Facebook. I'm happy to, we went through a lot of concepts really quickly. Anything you want to talk about, I'm happy to talk with you or Zoom for a few minutes or whatever. So
Sure.
thank you
Judy-
all for coming. And everything.
Yeah, Judy Mendenhall has a question.
Okay.
Hi, Pat. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for this. It's wonderful. You and I have had some good discussions about Michel Debost, having both of us have studied with him. And I really appreciate your keeping his methods here alive and telling us all about them.
Well, I never officially studied with him. It was just the case where I would read his articles in Flute Talk and say, check mark, I could do that, check mark. And so out of the blue, I called him and I said, I have this really nice flute camp out here. There's about 65 flute players that come, you know, from all over the Intermountain region. Would you like to come out and teach? And he said, yes. And I said, so how much would that be for a week? And he said, $4,000 and a plane ticket and a hotel. And this was like in 1995 or something, which was a lot of money at the time. And I didn't have support from our university to do this. And I just thought, okay, that sounds good to me. And I thought, if nobody comes, I'm going to have him to myself for a whole week and we'll just work on my playing. I had so many people that I actually cleared a huge profit on the class. In fact, I was kind of embarrassed. I thought maybe I should have sent him more money because he was marvelous and he loved it so much that he came out, I think 5 or 6 times over the next few years that I lived there. And he had a huge following, but he's such an amazing teacher. He's thought about things so well. And if you don't know his book, The Simple Flute, you should get it. And then periodically you should reread all of his articles in Flute Talk. I've been trying to keep them alive on Facebook Tip of the Day because he's such a thinker. And he went to med school for a short period of time before he went to the Paris Conservatory. So he studied anatomy and he knows what things are going on. So he doesn't talk about things that don't work the way he talks about how things should work and everything. And marvelous, marvelous, beautiful player. And I wished I'd had him sometime as a teacher. Oddly enough, my daughter, who's an oboist, was in a class of his at Oberlin, which he called Prima Vista, and it was for woodwind quintets, and all they did was sight read. And he, of course, parted with his words of wisdom when they were sight reading about how to phrase things and what to do and what potholes to avoid and everything. So amazing person, so.
Cool.
You were fortunate to have him. Very fortunate. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Barbara has a question.
Just Pat, it's so nice to meet you in this way. Thank you for your presentation. I just wondered if you'd say a few words about what you got from Francis Blaisdell, who you have in common.
Everything. I arrived at Interlaken having never had a flute teacher. I studied with a guy who played clarinet who went to Oberlin, and he was pretty musical. And then my next teacher was a viola player. And then the next one was an oboe player who had studied with tablato. So that's good. So he didn't have a clue to do with me. So he taught me all the tablato phrasing, which was amazing, But I got to Frances Blaisdell, and the first thing after I played for her, she said, that's the most god-awful sound I've ever heard in my life. And then she because I played with a ton of edge on the bottom. I didn't know any better. I was from Amarillo, Texas. I never heard anybody play, other than on a recording. And she said, I'm forever thankful. She said, you have so many problems. I want you to come every day at 5 o'clock. And so for 2 months that summer, she gave me a lesson, an hour lesson every day at 5 o'clock. And she did that for 2 years. And my mother tried to pay her for all the extra time. And what she said was, no, I have a feeling she'll do this for somebody else one day, which is called the Frances Blaisdell curse. And so I feel like if somebody asks you a question, you've got to give them more than just whatever, because that's what she did for me. But she just laid a whole foundation for me about how to play the flute. A lot of Barrere exercises, and she talked a lot about him. She talked a lot about Kincaid. So my first lesson with Mariano, I was expecting, since that she was the only flute teacher I'd ever had, that he would totally break down my playing again, And I said, at the first lesson, I don't have any problems. He said, no, you're set up great, because Frances Blaisdell did it. So, I mean, she really, not only with phrasing and vibrato and some repertoire, but just basically how to play the flute, about the whole way, how you angle the air or change the aperture, or getting the end of the flute forward. Amazing teacher, patient teacher. I can't say that every day I was the most willing student, but I chalk that up to being like, I don't know, 15 or 16 years old, so.
Lovely. Any final questions from anyone or comments? Well, thank you again for this wonderful session. It's always a privilege to learn from you. So thank you very much. And I look forward to every day reading your tip of the day on Facebook too. So.
Oh, good. Yes. Join me on for the tip of the day, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon. See you.
Thank
for more
Bye.
sessions.
Thank you. Thanks, Patricia.
Bye-bye all.
Thank you.